Well, unless you've been living under a rock for the last few weeks, you have probably heard that Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce got married. Now, if you have absolutely no idea who those people are, first of all, good for you. And please, allow me to provide some context. Taylor Swift is probably the most famous musician in the world right now, and Travis Kelce, her now husband, is one of the most famous football players in America. Between the two of them, they may be the closest thing we have to American royalty. Their wedding reportedly included around 1,000 guests, celebrities everywhere you looked, and naturally, it completely took over the internet. What fascinated me wasn't actually the wedding itself, but the comments people had about it. Within minutes of the wedding happening, millions of people who have never met either of them somehow knew exactly what this marriage meant. Some said Taylor had finally found her happily ever after. Others insisted that it was a whole elaborate publicity stunt. Every photograph, every guest, every flower arrangement became evidence in a case people were building about two complete strangers. Everyone seemed incredibly confident that they knew not only what Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce had done, but who they really were. Which is interesting, because none of us knows them, but if you do, please invite them to our Yo Pros event happening on July 28th. We know headlines about people. We know pictures. We know snippets of stories told by people who don't know them either. And yet we are quite confident in our ability to sort people. Of course, we don't do that with just celebrities. We do it with coworkers, family members, neighbors, people across the political aisle, sometimes even the person sitting in the pew across from you. We see one piece of someone's story and convince ourselves we know the whole thing. I wonder if that is exactly the instinct Jesus is exposing in today's gospel. Jesus tells the story of a farmer whose field has been sabotaged. He plants good seed, but during the night an enemy comes and sows weeds among the wheat. When everything begins to grow, the servants notice the problem and ask what seems like the most obvious question: do you want us to go gather the weeds? In other words, shouldn't we clean all this up? Now, I am not exactly a gardener. In fact, I have a remarkable gift for killing orchids. But I do know that when you find weeds, you're supposed to pull them. That's gardening 101. Which is what makes the farmer's answer a little strange. He says no. Let both of them grow together until the harvest. The servants want a pure field. The farmer wants a full harvest, and that distinction changes everything. The farmer is not pretending the weeds aren't there. He knows exactly what has happened. He also knows there is an enemy. But he also knows something the servants do not. They cannot tell as clearly as they think they can. In trying to pull up the weeds, they may tear up the wheat as well. The servants see the field as it is. The farmer sees the harvest it is becoming. That is how Jesus so often moves through the Gospels. The religious leaders were constantly sorting people into neat little categories: righteous, sinners, clean, unclean, people worth keeping, people worth removing. And Jesus keeps ruining their system. He eats with tax collectors, he forgives prostitutes, he touches lepers, he calls fishermen and zealots and collaborators and failures. The people everyone else has already written off become precisely the people Jesus gathers around himself. Not because he doesn't recognize their sin, but because he has come to save sinners. There's a very important detail in this parable that is very easy to miss. Jesus says the weeds are sown by an enemy. Notice, the weeds themselves are not the enemy. The weeds themselves are not the enemy. The enemy is the enemy. Christians have often made the mistake of treating sinners as though they were the enemy. But Jesus never does. The enemy seeks to destroy human beings. Jesus has come to rescue them. That's why the farmer refuses to let the servants begin uprooting weeds or people they believe do not belong. Jesus is perfectly clear that there will be a harvest, there will be a judgment, there will be a day when evil is finally dealt with, but that day belongs to God. Today is still the day of mercy. And thank God for that. Because if we're honest, eventually this parable stops being about everyone else. At first, it's easy to hear this story and start thinking about all of the weeds around us. But after a while, another question begins to creep in. What if I'm not just surrounded by the problem? What if, to borrow a line from our good friend Taylor Swift, it's me? Hi, I'm the problem. It's me. Most of us know ourselves well enough to admit that we are not always the heroes in our own stories. We know our selfishness and pride, the grudges we hold, the promises we've broken, the thoughts we hope no one else ever discovers. If salvation depends on correctly sorting the field, if the kingdom belongs only to those who have managed to pull out every weed from their own hearts, then none of us is standing here this morning with very much hope. Because we can't save ourselves. And that is exactly why Jesus tells this parable. The answer is not that we finally became good enough to belong in the field. The answer is the farmer himself. The Son of Man enters his own field. He walks into a world tangled with sin, failure, and death. He calls sinners and forgives enemies. He restores people whose stories everyone else assumes are finished. And the world sorts him. The religious leaders decide he is a blasphemer. Rome decides he is dangerous. The crowd decides he should be removed. The only truly righteous man who has ever lived is treated like the weed. He's cast outside the city, is condemned and cut off. He goes to the lowest place. He bears the judgment that belongs to sinners and enters death itself. And there, in the very place where sin thinks it has finally won, he destroys it forever. That is why the farmer waits. Not because God is indifferent to evil or lacks the power to judge. He waits because his deepest desire is not to condemn. His deepest desire is to save us. If God had harvested the field the first time the servants demanded it, Matthew would have died at his tax booth. Peter's story would have ended beside a charcoal fire after denying Jesus 3 times. Paul would have died persecuting Christians, and you and I, our stories would have ended on our worst day. But they didn't. Because Christ has already entered the field. He has already borne the judgment. He has already conquered death. And so the church becomes the place where weeds dare to have hope. Because we know the farmer is still at work. Every Sunday we come with empty hands. We confess that we have sinned in thought, word, and deed. We do not come pretending we've finally gotten our lives together. We come because Jesus has done for us what we could never do for ourselves. So maybe the invitation this morning is not to spend another week trying to identify the weeds. Maybe it's to simply tell the truth. It's me. Hi, I'm the problem. It's me. And then to hear an even better word. Yes, we are sinners who cannot save ourselves, but Christ already has. He has defeated sin and death, and because he has, your worst day will never have the final word. The farmer is still patient, the harvest is still coming, and his mercy is still making saints out of sinners. Amen.